So welcome to another episode of Talking Tech. Today's episode, I'm joined by Dom Penfold, who I've known for nearly 2 decades, who is tech leader at Lloyds. Welcome, Dom. Thanks for joining me.
Very welcome. Yeah, nice to be here.
Let's sort of stick with tradition, and maybe if you can do a small intro to you and kind of your journey into tech and where you are at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So I started in tech probably about 11 or 12 years old. My dad initially tried to get me into programming assembly language, which was maybe a bit of a stretch, but I got into BASIC at about 12 or 13, and then by 15 or 16, I was building graphics engines, actually, back in assembly and C, but doing special effects work. So I coded all through uni and then ended up in computer games. So I actually spent 7 years of computer games doing special effects work and graphics engines. And eventually decided I'd actually like a decent salary and not have to work 100-hour weeks. And so I moved into energy trading, which was much easier on a time perspective, and actually really interesting challenges. I went into energy trading thinking, oh my God, from computer games to this is going to be the most boring thing in the world. And actually, it turns out wherever you work in tech, there's really interesting problems. And that was one of the big things I took away from my time at Trayport. So I stayed there 5 years and then moved on to a company called IG Group. Spent 10 or 11 years there, worked in lots of different sections of that business. And again, so many interesting problems. Like I had no idea that IG were the biggest trading reporting entity in Europe. And they were doing up to 1.6 million trades a day, which is like enormous volumes on behalf of their retail clients. But yeah, fantastic time there. And then I moved over to a company called Money Farm. I spent a year as CTO in a FinTech, which was really interesting. And then from there came over to Lloyds. So I've been at Lloyds now for 2.5 years, primarily looking after credit cards, embedded finance, and the financial wellbeing groups. But also recently, I've just been stepping into a gap on the CIO side to cover consumer lending. So it's been an interesting journey so far.
Very interesting, and sort of nicely segues into kind of what we've spoken about, having been in those different businesses around like big banks and big tech businesses, and what happens when a bank tries to compete with a fintech, and how that kind of works at the moment.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting thing to see, because there was a big story sort of 10 years ago that the fintechs were basically going to eat the banks, and that hasn't really transpired, right? If you look at it now, the banks are still pretty profitable, the big major banks. The fintechs, I mean, Revolut are getting very profitable. Monzo's reached profitability, so you're starting to see that profitability come in, but they're still smaller by size by quite a bit actually than the majors.
Because you're right, it was about 10 years there was that big push with challenger banks are going to take over, from traditional banks.
Right. Yeah. And I think they did have a really big impact. So if you look at what Lloyds do now, I mean, digital interactions are 99% of what we do with customers, right? So it has massively changed the way that banks work with their customers, and I think the fintechs clearly are responsible for that trend. But now the big banks have kind of caught up on the digital side. I wonder how much of the gap is really there still. I mean, I still think the apps they make are really very good and very beautiful, and there's still a gap for us to completely close it. But we're much closer now than we were 10 years ago.
And do you think that drive on the digital side and innovation was driven by trying to compete or trying to think like a fintech, or do you think that would have naturally evolved over time?
I think it's driven by what customers want, right? And customers want to be able to interact on their phone. They don't want to have to come in and see you in person to open a credit card or whatever. So I think that's really driven by what customers want. And fintechs were just very good at delivering what customers wanted quickly. So inevitably the change would have happened. I think fintechs just pushed it a lot harder. It really highlighted to the big banks, you're going to have to respond, because if you don't, you are going to lose your market. And so I think that is what the fintechs did. They forced that transformation much quicker.
And how do you think that kind of relationship between banks, fintechs, big tech, like how do you see that evolving? How do you think you see that changing?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I would say a fintech, it's kind of in the name, right? They get that tech is really critical, and they're pretty much tech-driven businesses. So most of them are run by people that are very technical, either were engineers or were very close to engineering. And I think the big banks traditionally haven't been run by technologists, right? They're run by people that understand banking very well, which sort of makes sense. But I think as you go into the future, you're seeing the technologists in more and more senior roles in those banks, and that transition starts to happen. And I think when you get to a point that a bank starts seeing itself as technology driven, and it's not afraid to say that publicly, and Lloyds goes on the record as saying, we will be the UK's biggest fintech. Yeah, they're getting it. They're understanding that tech is critical now, and so I think that is really starting to change, and that is a big philosophical change for a bank when you start treating technology as not something that you have to do because you've been forced to do it by someone else, or something you can give to a third party to do because it's not really your bread and butter. I think the banks realise now you need to be on top of your game, and so that really has changed the approach.
And I still feel, or maybe it's, I don't know enough about it, but I still get the impression that a lot of those banks on the sort of C-suite board level still don't have probably a technical voice, or do you think that's changed as well?
I can't speak for all banks. I know at Lloyds there is technical conversation right at the top as well. So I was recently talking about I can't go into detail, but looking at some agentic AI use cases. And actually in the room we had the group COO, CEO, you had some really big hitters in the bank who were very interested to know about how this stuff is working.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure Charlie told me once that he started coding in COBOL at the beginning of his career. So he's doing software engineering.
I'll take that back then.
CEO, right? Yeah. So I think you're seeing more of that over time. Certainly at Lloyds, and I'd imagine that trend will be across the industry.
And then you touched on there how AI is now baked into everything everyone does. How do you see that changing the landscape, and how that would affect technology platforms moving forward, especially in a bank where there's so much more regulation?
And yeah. I mean, we're looking very closely. I mean, personally, I'm super interested in AI coding, and I've got little sub projects that I'm doing on the side using Cursor and
rebuilding. True techie, Dom. That's why.
Yeah, right. Yeah, rebuilding apps that took me a year when I was 18 in a week now. Yeah. It's so productive, and so absolutely, it's going to have a big impact in terms of how quickly we can produce software. And I think we need to find a way to get it into the bank in a safe way. So we're not rushing to it and just putting our entire source code into markdown files and just letting the AI run away with it. We're being quite considered, but we are rolling out to teams. We've got teams really starting to think about agentic workflows and how all your other agents can work together to produce software. And I think you just have to start using it. You have to start finding what works and what doesn't. The big thing with the way that we've thought about things like machine learning in the past is quite rigorous. And if you think about things like credit decisioning, it's very important that you can say why you gave someone a loan precisely. And so you have to have deterministic decisions that lead to that outcome. Right. So we might use we'd call it AI, but really it's deterministic machine learning. We might use that to make those kinds of decisions, but we'll always be able to trace exactly why something happened. Now we move into LLMs. No one really quite understands what they're doing under the hood, right? So we have a decision that comes out from an LLM or a conversation. You've got to be quite thoughtful about where that's appropriate. Clearly, you wouldn't use an LLM should I loan this person some money? An LLM is not going to be able to give you a reasoned thing unless you tell it to. It's not going to give you that very reasoned response. And so we have to think hard about where the right place is to use that. But they are very, very powerful tools, and we'll certainly be using it as a software development tool, and we are. And I think increasingly we'll be thinking about how do we give this to our customers as well in a controlled way where we can trust that it's not going to do anything unpleasant with people's money. That's being the most critical thing.
And it's interesting because I always feel we've done significant work with banks, but I've always felt like they're always fighting that balance between innovation, resilience, customer experience, and customer trust. Do you think that's getting better? Do you think AI is helping that, or do you think that's going to come with its own issues and problems as well? But
yeah, I mean, we've got to get our heads around it, right? And I think the big banks have been very good at risk management, and I think it is really critical that we think about it carefully. But with AI, there is some stuff here that's very different, and so it's important that we understand that and get senior people in risk need to understand how an LLM works. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to build the right risk frameworks, right?
Yeah.
And so it's you can't assume that if you get one answer one day, you'll get the same answer the next day, because it's not deterministic and it might be a different model, and you don't know which model is going to run your queries or talk to a consumer. So we have to find a way to get much more rigorous about that and build risk frameworks which are appropriate, right?
Yeah, and I think, as you said, I also feel like it's changing so quickly and so fast. It's how do you keep up with that while still making the right risk and resilient decisions as well.
Yeah, and you have to experiment, and so we have
Yeah.
been experimenting with, will our consumers actually communicate with an AI? Like, how's that going to feel? And we've tried some stuff in like quite sensitive areas, like not this isn't real world with people in directly like using it, but we've done things like financial well-being. We've looked at, well, would a consumer actually talk about their debt issues with an AI? Like, how does that feel? And you talk to consumers and they're like, I don't want to talk to a machine. Like, I want to talk to a person. But then you let them, and actually, it's judgment free, right?
Yeah.
The AI is not going to sit there and make an opinion about you. And it's actually, we found that most consumers actually really like that about it, and were much more positive after they'd had that experience, right? So for us, we really need to think about how do we like roll that out in a responsible way, because I think there is actually consumer value here, as well as it just being something that potentially just increases how many people we can talk to. Because the trick for financial well-being is, you don't want to leave people. You would ideally have those people talk to you about the situation they're in, so you can try and help them. So the more easily we can do that, the better. And it's a good doorway for them.
Well, I think there's two things there, isn't it? I think everyone's becoming more comfortable with using AI, and as you said, I think probably once they've had a good experience, they're bound to kind of engage with it more. It also then creates, I just thinking when you saying that, it also then creates like another opportunity around the data collected from one of those conversations and how that's used. And I suppose from a bank's perspective, what other products and what other services you could offer and how you collect that, right?
It's an interesting one. I mean, I guess you could, but I think there's a real ethical question about what you do with data that people provide. And you do have to be clear to people how you're using the data. So if you're storing transcripts, you need to tell people you're storing transcripts, and you've got to be clear about why you're storing transcripts. So GDPR puts some pretty clear posts in the way of how you can do this stuff. But if there is another product which is appropriate for the customer, then I think that's something we would think about, I guess. But we're not quite there yet.
So I suppose this is a bit more specific to you talking about credit cards and consumer lending and that kind of stuff. Like, it's probably quite a broad question, but like at the moment, who does it feel like who's kind of winning those relationships at the moment with banks, fintechs, big techs? Who do you think's kind of ahead of the game?
We're still ahead of the game at Lloyds, I think, in a lot of those spaces in consumer lending, which is a good place to be. I think the question is like, where's the competition going to come from? And as a provider of financial products, the competition looks like it might well be fintechs actually in time. Obviously, it's the other majors at the moment, but over time, I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those fintechs start to compete harder. So that'll be an interesting space to watch. But then probably the really big battle is for the consumer, right? So at the moment, consumers log into the Lloyds app, and that's where they look at their credit card and they look at their balance and transactions. But in future, like Google would prefer it if you just looked in the Google Wallet, right? And the same for Apple. And so the question becomes, where does the consumer go over time? So we don't want to just provide the financial product, right? We'd rather own the consumer journey and be much closer to the customer. I think that's probably the battle that we're looking at over the next few years.
I probably think, I've been sort of covering a lot of base with it, but I feel like the banks have more probably historical trust in terms of where people's money is, and kind of I would imagine it as an age demographic, the fintech, big tech businesses attract a younger demographic. They used to probably have historical.
That's definitely true, and I think where a fintech gives you a really lovely onboarding experience, and they are really nicely done. Well, I think when things go wrong, like the bigger banks are going to be that little bit more easy to work with. They have these huge departments that are there to deal with problems and when something goes wrong and when you have a fraudulent transaction. I think that's still something that we have as a USP, really. But
I agree.
I'm sure in times that gap will close as well, right? I mean, none of this stuff is impossible to fix.
And what I find interesting is this: how do people choose? Like, there's so many options there, isn't there? Like of what's out there, and you've got Revolut, Monzo, Starlet, all these there's a finite pool of consumers they're competing with, but it's like, how do you attract them? How do you stand out from the rest of them?
Which becomes your classic marketing. Like, how do you get eyeballs? And Lloyds has a big brand, which is good for us, and so we can get eyeballs like that. But you've got to have good advertising. You've got to be on TikTok. If you want to get to the younger demographics, you have to be where customers are. And I think increasingly, as people start to ask ChatGPT for advice on their finances, you've got to find a way to try and get into those conversations too. So, you're seeing new ways of thinking about generative engine optimization, or kind of like search engine optimization, but for ChatGPT. And how do you get to the point where if you ask ChatGPT, where's the best credit card, the response is, well, try Lloyds, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, marketing gets more complicated in this world, but that will always be the battle, I think, is to make sure your brand is the one people think of first.
And with, I suppose, with that in mind, like it's changed so much in the last 10 years, even 5 years. What do you like from a customer experience? What do you see them expecting from financial service? What do you see them like prioritizing, which probably they didn't previously?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think people are expecting ease, really, and ease of use, right? And I still think that's the case, and I still think there's a gap to close for us a little bit, right? There's still a few things we can do to get better in that space, and I think for us, we just have to focus on really being the obvious number one choice. And we do things quickly. We offer you a credit line straight away. You don't have to wait 3 days to find out whether or not we'll give you a credit card. Like, all those things just need to be immediate and responsive, because that's what people are coming to expect, right? They're not used to, oh, let me just enter this like 1 week application process for a credit card. They go to a comparison site, they pick the one they want, and they want the card. They want to be spending within an hour, right? I mean, and we have to get to that point where you can just turn this stuff around very, very quickly. So I think that's really still the challenge, but it's just that immediacy that people expect.
Well, I think that you're absolutely. I think that's like having teenage kids is like that kind of dopamine hit straight away of something on social media, or this is what they need immediately. It's the same with consumer spending. Is like whoever you are, with your Lloyds, Barclays, Amex, whatever. Like it's getting that immediate. Like, I want a card to spend on immediately. How do I do that? What's the easy?
Don't tell people to come back in an hour.
No, exactly. Yeah. Well, one of the other questions, which more from like the perspective of the technologists that follow us and we work with, and you've got great insight. Like, there's probably like a little misconception of like banking technology isn't as exciting, isn't as innovative, isn't like. Can you shed a bit of light on that? And like, because I know we've spoken about it lots, and I'm always surprised at how amazing it is and all the different stuff you get. Is it? Maybe you could just shed a bit of light on the kind of innovation and technology.
The complexity of the technology. Yeah, I mean, exactly. As I said, like every company's got interesting technology challenges, and there are plenty at Lloyds. And a lot of it is a volume play, right? We've got an awful lot of retail customers, and so I remember we had spikes at IG of maybe like 2,000 logins per second would be our biggest spike.
Yeah.
Here we're talking 35,000 per second, right? So the volume you have to deal with is enormous, actually. And the infrastructure that requires behind the scenes is really big. And this is an interesting one for us as well. Like, you've got to try and keep your uptime as high as you possibly can. Now, in a future where we might want an agent to have a conversation with you, you're going to need really robust uptime for that kind of stuff to work. And it's certainly something you don't see at the minute from Anthropic and OpenAI. There is downtime, it does get slow. Like, we're going to have to start thinking about, well, where are we hosting those agents then? Like, are we going to host them in our own data centers maybe, or we're going to lease dedicated data centers from someone else? Like, there's a lot of interesting conversations that come in on that. So yeah, technology trends is definitely a big move in that space at the minute for us to get our heads around.
I mean, we'd probably talk for hours about it as well. That's what I find really interesting around all this, the use of data, the providing of information, the amount it's creating is like, as you said, is where we're going to store it, how much is it going to cost, how resilient is it? As you said, is it going to create more downtime? Like, there's kind of a byproduct of everything that's happening here that's it's going to create its own set of issues and probably new startups and stuff that will deal with it, but it's sort of just...
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it is interesting to look at like who is actually running AI today, right?
Yeah.
So really, the only two people doing a lot are OpenAI and Anthropic. And so you see Meta have just spent 40 billion on data centers, and today they announce they're going to start renting that out, right? Because they don't have enough use case internally. And I think that surely will change over the next year or two, and we'll start to see companies that are really just using AI very, very hard to make their companies grow. And I still don't think we've quite seen that in the market. Like, the big AI companies are still infrastructure.
Yeah.
They're putting that underlying stuff. But I mean, if you look at product build on AI, I've been coding with AI for 3 years now, I guess. And I think 3 years ago, you'd get AI to build an app, and then you'd just chase your tail and you'd fix something and something else would pop out, and you could never really build anything.
Yeah.
And then probably mid last year, we're starting to get a bit more consistent. And then towards the end of last year, starting this year, like you can build very complicated applications, and suddenly the AI doesn't get lost, and it's quite consistent, and it doesn't break things when it fixes that bug. And it's just a complete change really this year in how you can use the tools. And it's not going to be long until we start seeing companies coming through which are using those tools properly. It'll be very interesting as they start to land.
Do you think that, because I completely agree, do you think that is AI getting better, or do you think that's users getting better at being able to give it information, talk to it, feed it, rather than, as you said, just go away, build me this app, and it comes back, and then you're like, well, that's not quite what I wanted, or whatever,
Yeah, it's definitely the former, honestly. Like, because I think if I look at the quality of prompts I give AI today, far worse than the ones I gave it 2 years ago.
Really?
I can pretty much just give it like a one sentence. Can you just make that a little bit better? And really very vague things like that. And you can see the agent go and think about that, and like, I wonder what they mean. Well, we were talking about this, and maybe it's related to that. And you can see that kind of chain of reasoning going on now in the agent. So it's become a lot smarter. And I think probably the harnesses as well. So I'm a big Cursor user. I think the Cursor harness itself has a lot to do with like how the agents respond. And so we've learned how to make them do stuff, but also the power of the agents has just gone up really an awful lot. And certainly Opus 4.5, 4.6, I would say, from then on, the models are just super capable at coding. It's a bit sad. Like, I've spent years and years getting good at coding.
But I also feel like it's going to still require people that have your knowledge and ability to kind of guide them in the direction you want and the outcomes you want. Yes, I'm looking at it as like, well, hopefully it creates, I don't know, gives you more time to be more productive, more strategic, make decisions that speed things along.
Yeah, you start to think, are we going to become product engineers rather than software engineers? Yeah, that idea of that change of name is quite interesting, because I think it talks to what we really do now, which is, well, what do you want to actually build?
Yeah.
And that developer you used to have in the corner that like spent all their time just doing code, and you just gave them problems and they coded them, and they were just in a little box, and they didn't want to know why they were coding them, but they just code them really well. We've got an engineer that does that, and that's the AI. What we really need our engineers to do is to understand the problem space, to talk to the business and the product owners, and to build the best possible products. It is product engineering now, right? It's a really interesting shift.
Just before I let you go, I suppose on that there's a good question, one that you won't know the exact answer, but kind of if we're looking ahead with financial services and banks and big tech, how do you think that landscape will look in the next 10 years if you were looking ahead?
In terms of financial services, it's interesting. Like, I do think users are increasingly going to just be using AI to do stuff for them. And that it's very hard to predict what that's going to look like, really. Right? Yeah. Because I'm sure OpenAI and Anthropic would want you to basically just go to them and say, could you buy this for me? And then Anthropic just buys it for you and take a little cut along the way. Like, I totally get it.
You think that really?
And everyone else in the ecosystem won't want them to do that. So there's going to be a bit of a battle. Like, Amazon will be like, I'd like you to use our AI to buy your products, not Anthropic's. And so you're going to see a bit of a competition about eyeballs, really. And it will be decided by consumer preference at the end of the day, because the customers will decide what they want to do. So it is hard to predict. Like, I'm confident you'll still have banks in 10 years. There's no doubt about that. And in terms of who's going to provide your loan, at the bottom layer, it is going to be people like Lloyds. Like, we will totally be here as a bank. The question and the battleground will be, is the consumer talking to us directly, or is their agent talking to us? I mean, that's the kind of thing that we could be looking at.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because I feel like there's still, like, people like a customer journey. Like, but I suppose if you as the provider or the lender, you're actually talking to an agent of a consumer, it kind of moves that bit, doesn't it?
I think it does, and I think once you get used to the idea and you get a bit of trust that the agent isn't just going to go and buy a Ferrari for you because it thought you wanted a Ferrari, which you might, but actually that's not the best thing to do, right? So once you get the trust, though, that actually fiscally they're not going to go mad, and actually they are probably just going to find you the best credit card for your spending pattern, and they'll just take it out for you, and then it'll automatically be loaded in your wallet, and you'll just pay by tapping your phone, and that'll automatically go to the best credit card given your spending profile. Once that starts to happen, do you really want to do the application process anymore? Like, probably not, right?
Yeah.
just leave the agent to do it. So it is going to be that trust thing, and we'll see how close it goes. But I think the next couple of years are going to be very interesting.
It's super interesting, and I find it fascinating how quickly it's changing. And I think it's one of those things that probably you and I want to have a chat in a couple of years about this exact thing.
Let's come back. We should have done predictions, shouldn't we?
Yeah, exactly. Put a wager on it. It's I do find, and actually, what I said, I've known you for nearly 2 decades. What I find interesting is, people who, as you said, are like passionate technologists, how much they embrace it and use it and like take it as part of their day-to-day role. Like that's what I find extraordinary about it. It's just,
and there's still a battle, right? Some people really are engaging and like, oh my God, all these things I can do are just blowing my mind. And some people are really scared about it. And are like, actually, you'll never be able to do code as well as me. And so, and there is that kind of like slight pushback as well at the moment, and use AI really thoroughly. And legitimate questions, I think, but you can see that some people are just getting it and embracing it.
And I think this is just another iteration of technology. It's the best engineers that we dealt with 10 years ago were the ones that were interesting, innovative, used to research stuff. It's the same as that.
Absolutely.
Dom, look, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. Thank you very much indeed. It's always great chatting to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nick. I enjoyed the conversation.
Perfect. And obviously, to everyone else, please join us on the next episode of Talking Tech. Thanks, Dom.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.